Hi, I'm Doris Belzer Quatek Cohen. I was born on February 13th of 1926 at Nicholson Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. My mother came from Ośmiana, which was, I believe, Poland at the time. Sometimes it was Poland, sometimes it was Russia. She came here because her whole family wanted to come. She had two or maybe three sisters, I don't remember, and a brother, and her mother and father. So they sent for my mother and her brother first. My mother's brother's name was Sam Bernstein. And my mother had several uncles and aunts in Omaha, and my mother was supposed to come and stay with Joe and Clara Bernstein, her uncle and aunt, but instead she went to live with Jake and Ida Bernstein because Ida needed her help in the house.
How was Joe Bernstein related?
Joe Bernstein was an uncle, and Jake Bernstein was an uncle, and Mrs. Lazarus was an aunt, Mrs. Shapiro was an aunt, and forgot.
These were all sisters and brothers?
My mother's brothers and sisters. And so my mother came and she lived with the Bernsteins, who didn't have enough beds, so she used to sleep with Bob Bernstein. And every once in a while she would feel it was kind of wet in the bed. And so she always teased him about it, that I always slept with my little Robert, but he always pissed in bed. And eventually Mom got married to my father, Nathan Belzer, and he had several aunts and several brothers and sisters. And I want to clarify about my mother's family. She had only one brother who came with her to the United States. The rest were all aunts and uncles. She lived with her aunts and uncles, her aunt and uncle, Jake Bernstein, and instead of living with Joe Bernstein, because Ida needed help in the house, she had little children, and she was also a dressmaker, so she helped Aunt Ida in the house instead. Now about my mother's family, she had a mother who had lost one finger by accident, and they wouldn't let her into the United States, so she had to stay in Europe. My mother's father had, they think now, it must have been glaucoma, because he was blind in one eye and he couldn't get entrance into the United States. One sister wanted to go to Israel, but they decided she should stay and help the mother and father. The other sister, I don't know about. And if there was a third sister, I think my mother was a third sister though, so naturally she came here. My father's side of the family all came over, all the sisters and brothers except for one brother who stayed in Russia, and he had his own family there and he stayed there. The rest of the sisters he didn't have any other brothers here, all came to Omaha and had their families here. We all grew up together. Of course, they're all gone, but there's a lot of cousins. In fact, there was a family reunion in San Francisco a year ago, and there was over 100 cousins there, and we had a wonderful time. Now, when I was little, my parents moved from an apartment in Benson to a house on about probably 65th and Military. My mother thought this was ideal. My father had a grocery store in Benson, and we're right across the street from a school. Little did she know, until it was time for me to register to grade school, it was a Catholic school, and Father Biney said I couldn't go there. because I wasn't Catholic. So my parents had to find another house after just a few years of living in that house on 65th and Military. We moved to 56th in Ohio, and it was a nice house. All of us were raised there until I think Eddie might have been about 3 years old when we moved out of that house and we went to 31st and Lafayette. And then I went to Rose Hill School first, and I only had 1 year to go, so my mother said, go finish and graduate from Rose Hill, and the other 4 kids went to Franklin School, which was kind of a long walk for us because Rose Hill was only 3 blocks from our old house. But they all graduated from Franklin. Milt was a mischievous one. If there was trouble to be had, Milt was the leader. And he just loved to do things and like dare me to do it, and he would do it. Dave was Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, and Eddie was the baby and the favorite. Shirley was Mom's pet, because Shirley was a very fragile-looking child, and my mother always kind of hovered over her. And I was my father's child because I liked working in the store. In fact, I ran away from home once, and I had to pass the fire barn on the main street in Benson, and the fireman happened to realize who I was because everybody in Benson, all the merchants knew one another. The firemen, the policemen also knew everybody who had a business in Benson. So he sees me walking and he says, "Hey, Doris, where are you going?" And I was preschool. I said, "I'm going to go help my dad at the grocery store." Oh, so he takes me by the hand, he takes me into the fire barn, and he puts me up on the fire truck, and he said, "How would you like to take a ride in this?" And we talked, and he was very humorous. I just laughed at him. I thought he was very funny. Next thing I see, my father is walking into the fire barn. And he looked at me and says, "What are you doing up here?" I said, "I came to help you in the store." So he took me by the hand and he took me home. And he says, "Don't you ever walk up here again? Because this is a busy street." Busy. Now, we wouldn't call it very busy. But in those days, I guess it was considered a real busy street. And I used to go, every opportunity I had, I would go to the store. Even when I was old enough to ride a bike, which was, I know in grade school, maybe 4th or 5th grade, something in there, I used to ride my bike up to the store, stay there until it was closing time, and I would ride home in the truck with my dad, and he'd put my bike in the truck so I'd have it at home to come back another time. Shirley was a designated little mother in our family. She looked after Dave and Ed. She was born a little mother, I think. She was very good with children. And me, I could take them or leave them. Then, after we moved to, let me tell you another story about Milt. He didn't like Ernie Adams, who was the football coach at Benson High School in those days. And Milt didn't like Mr. Adams, and he was a kid, maybe 7, 8 years old. He took the garden hose from Adam's house, stuck it in a basement window, which was open, and turned the faucet on. Well, you don't know the hell that was raised in our family with Milt. He was punished royally. There are so many little things that, kids get into little problems that they shouldn't, but we all made it. We lived to be an adult. We all went to Central High School, graduated. Of course, I worked in the store the most. Shirley would come, but most of the time, Mom had her helping with the kids. And I I worked in the store, but I loved it. I didn't do it because my father said, will you come to the store? Will you do this or that? I loved it, and I went. And I grew up with the grocery store. He taught me the register. I used to have to stand on a box when I was shorter, and in those days we put bulk foods in cellophane bags. You weighed them, you sealed them, and you marked them. Well, so I stood on a box, and you put up the navy beans and anything that would come in bulk. But mostly I remember the sticky dried fruit we had to put in the sack, and that I didn't like, but I got through it. But the only thing was coconut. I'm a coconut fiend, and as much coconut that went in the sack went into me. And my father said, Doris, you can't do that. You can't eat up all the profits. So then I stopped doing that. My father had a lot of faith in me. He would send me to the bank and do the business a lot of times. I was authorized to sign any check from either store, the Benson store or the Burt Street store. He gave me free rein. When I went away to college, my father said, you just call me and tell me how much you spent, so I'll put it in my checkbook. And then after a while, he says, take a few checks with you, and you call me and tell me what you did. But he never put a limit on me. I did what I wanted. When I was growing up in high school, I had a certain amount of allowance, but half of it had to be put in the bank, and half of it was my spending money for high school, and it was not very lucrative. So I learned that maybe I should put more in the bank and less in my pocket, and my father really was proud that I would do something like that, rather than a little less in the bank and more in my pocket. He never reprimanded me. I don't think so, except if I stayed out too late when I went out on a date. Then he wouldn't reprimand me. My punishment from my father was he did not talk to me. We're sitting at a kitchen table having breakfast on Sunday morning, which was a ritual in our house. And he would say to Shirley, tell your sister to pass the butter. I'm sitting right there. But pass the butter. Tell your sister to pass the butter. Well, I can remember a few times when my father would say to me, Doris, don't you think you should come to work Saturday? I said, I've got a date Saturday night. Well, what time is the date? I said, 8 o'clock. The store didn't close till 9 o'clock, or maybe it was 7 and 8, whatever. And I'd say, okay, so I'll tell him to pick me up later. Well, came Saturday morning, he says, can you call him and tell him to pick you up when you're supposed to go? But I never asked him. If he told me I could go, I would go. I did everything in the store. I swept the floors. I took the onions that came in mesh bags, I believe it was, or gunny sacks, and put them in boxes and from the basement, then take them upstairs and put them in the onion bin. The same way with potatoes. I had to do everything in the store so that I could learn every aspect of the grocery business, and I did. But I loved every minute of it. If something had gone wrong with the refrigeration, it wasn't like today. The repairmen were all small businesses, and they came at the middle of the night if we had to have them. And I never let my dad go to the store alone. Mom was busy. She would like to have gone, but she had 5 kids at home. I was the oldest, but I still couldn't take care of the other 4. So Mom stayed home, and I went to the store with my father. And I'd take a pillow from the couch, and I'd crawl under the counter where they kept the cash and carry bags. That's what we called them in those days. And I'd sleep or rest under there until the refrigeration was fixed. Then I would go home. Sometimes it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think that's why my father did so many nice things for me. I will never forget, on my 13th birthday, February 13th, I was 16 years old, and I came from school to the store. And my father said, don't take off your coat. I want you to go with me. I said, okay, I don't question. We go over to this house, and I could show you to this day where that house was, right on 40th and Cummings, Hamilton, I mean. 40th and Hamilton, a brown house. And he pulls into the driveway. He says, come here, I want to show you something. And he shows me this little coupe, a Dodge coupe, and it was kind of a tan color. And he says, what do you think of this car? And I says, not bad, cute. And he says, what do you really think? It's a nice car? I said, yeah, but you're not thinking of buying it, are you? He said, why not? I said, we got 5 kids. Where are you going to put them in a coupe? And it was only 2-seaters. It wasn't even a rumble seat. And he says to me, Doris, what day is today? I said, it's Thursday. He said, and what else? And it just hit me. This is my birthday. He's buying me a car. I never dreamed I would own a car. We had a car sitting in the garage all the time because my father took the truck to work, and the Oldsmobile sat in the garage. And I used to back it up and pull it up. It was a long driveway. And that's how I really learned how to drive until he sent one of the helpers in the store, took me out one day, and he says, you don't need any lessons, you know how to drive. And that's how I got my license. Well, I didn't get my license. I was driving, and every night he let me drive the truck home from the store. Well, that wasn't so bad, except he says, Doris, why don't you go, it's slow, why don't you take the car or the truck and go and pay the bill at Brandeis? Well, it's walking distance from 16th and Burt to 16th and Douglas. I said, okay, but I'm going to walk up. He said, no, take the car. Okay, I'll take the car. And so I drove up 16th Street, and I see a parking spot on 16th and Burt, but it was on the east side of 16th, and Brandeis was on the west side of 16th. So I took a left turn, and I no sooner got round that corner, and that policeman was right there. He says, don't you see the sign? It says no left turn. So here I was. It was a Saturday. He told me I had to go to the police station. My father came in. I'm sitting there. They didn't put me in a cell. They put me on a chair by the desk. My father comes in laughing. He says, what are you doing here? I said, I made a left turn where I wasn't supposed to. I don't know what happened, but he talked to the policeman, and we went home. Went back to the store. And when we got home, my father says, you have to go get your license or you're not going to get out of this trouble. So Monday, we went to the courthouse, I think it was. I don't remember. I think the courthouse, wherever you got your license in those days. And they want to know how old I am, and my father gives me an elbow. He says, you're 16. I said, oh yeah, I'm 16 years old when the man asked me how old, because you couldn't get your license if you were 15. So I got my license, and for years I was a year younger until I finally it affected me. I said, I can't say I'm 25 when I'm really 24. Okay, so that was that episode. There were so many good things. I don't even remember the bad things because I don't think there were very many.
Who were your neighbors when you lived when the family was all together on Lafayette?
Well, in Benson, there were a handful of Jewish people. None of us lived right next door to each other. We were all a few blocks away. There were the Londons, and there was the Tobbs, the Papernis. I know I'm going to forget somebody. Oh, the Rochmans. There was more than that, but I don't remember. And we were all very friendly. I think most of them played cards one night a week, either Saturday night or Sunday night, but not Papernis. Mr. Paperny did not play cards, but the rest of them did. They played a very cheap, friendly poker game. And the women would play bridge in the other room, and they always served a light supper. When we moved to 31st and Lafayette, that was a Jewish neighborhood, really Jewish. There were more Jews on our block than there were Gentiles. And I couldn't even begin to tell you. The Kirschenbaums, Myra and Dvora Kirschenbaum lived next door. And Joe Bernstein lived down the street. And I can't remember the name of the people who lived next door to the Kirschenbaums. And there were, oh, please don't, I just can't remember them all. Rothmans lived on the street. Ricklands lived on the street. Gitlins lived on that street. Muskins lived on that street. Silvermans lived on that street. I don't know. And how many people lived on Hamilton? There were lots of them. But it was strictly a Jewish neighborhood because people were either going to synagogue at 25th and Seward, which was our synagogue, or 24th and Nicholas, or later years to whatever they called that shul across the street from Tech High, right around 32nd and Cummings, when the other two shuls kind of went under because there not enough attendance. That was before Beth Israel was built on 52nd Street.
Do you remember trips to 24th Street?
Oh, Saturday night when my dad closed the store. This is before I could drive, because after I could drive, I did the driving, and Dad could go home. We would go to 24th Street. We would stop at Schuckert's, sometimes at Glasses, because my dad liked to spread it amongst the Jews. He doesn't like to say, I only trade at that place. So he used to hit them all. We would get our orders. Rose, Schuckert, oh dear. And the Schuckert boys, they were there, I don't know how late, on Saturday nights. They would cut the meat, and that Rosie Schuckert would pick up that quarter of a side of beef. She'd break that whole thing down, and she did it better than any of the fellas. She was good. So we'd get our order, and then we'd go home, and we wouldn't have to go to the butcher shop on Sunday when it was so crowded. But Sunday we would go to the bakery, we would get our bagels and our bread, and I remember the health bread that everybody used to like, a real heavy pumpernickel bread. That was an outing, because we lived in Benson at that time, or 31st and Lafayette.
How about the trips to the synagogue on the holidays?
Oh, well, when we lived in Benson, my parents used to stay with Jake and Evelyn Burstein, who lived on 32nd and Hamilton, because they wouldn't ride on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So they stayed there overnight. And us kids, we catch as catch can, you know. We got there to the synagogue however we could. When I was able to drive, I used to drive. But otherwise, I don't know how we really got there. I can't really remember. Then we moved to 31st and Lafayette. We always walked. Phyllis Kirschenbaum and I and Shirley always walked to synagogue together. And coming home, everybody lived, all the Kirschenbaums, you know. There was the Kirschenbaum families. We never called them by name. We called them the Myrtle Kirschenbaums because they lived on Myrtle. The Lafayette Kirschenbaums, they lived on Lafayette. The Decatur Kirschenbaums, and the name of the street? Lincoln Boulevard. There was a Lincoln Boulevard Kirschenbaums. So we would all walk together as a big group, would walk because we all stayed to the end of services. And the Scheikens, Bess Scheiken lived with her parents on Myrtle. They were part of it. We walked together home, and most of the time, well, maybe not most of the time, but a lot of times, my mother would bake a big honey cake and a big whatever other kind of cake you ate on holiday, whatever it is. The yellow cake, I can't remember. I'm getting too old to remember some of this stuff. So my mother would fix a platter of it before she went to shul. And it was there on the table, and they all had to have a schnapps or a bramfen or a something before they would go home for their meal after Rosh Hashanah. And we'd have a house full, and they'd have their piece of cake and their drink, whatever it was, and then they'd go home. We'd eat lunch maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And Yom Kippur, that we didn't do, because I always drove the car down to the shul and left it there and waited for my parents, because I knew that they didn't want to walk home. So that's how we got home after Yom Kippur. And I remember when we would go to, what's his name? It's Hertzberg's house before Simchas Torah. And my father said, now don't give him the money, but you have to pick up a flag and I think the candle, because the apples we brought from the store. And he said, now here's the money, just lay it on the table and tell him you want 3 flags and 3 candles. And then we walk over to the shul, which was only, if I remember correctly, a couple of blocks, 3 blocks, 4 blocks to 25th and Seward. And we had our apple and our flag and our candle, and we would go march around the synagogue for Simchas Torah, the inside, where the parade with the Torahs. Those are good days. Oh, and the Kirschenbaums, the Lafayette Kirschenbaums, lived right next door when I was growing up, right next door to our shul. And we'd all play in their yard. Everybody knew if you can't find your child, it's in Kirschenbaum's yard. And so we were left alone, and we go and come, and we just enjoyed the holidays down there because everybody knew everybody. And you grew up knowing those kids. We all went to Central High School. And every day after school, I would go to the store because I walked from Central to my father's store on 16th and Burt. And I did some homework when I first got there, and then I would help whatever needed to do. My father started me out with a broom. And after that, I just kind of grew up. But when I was in high school, I ran the register. And Milt worked in the store. Shirley, occasionally. I don't remember really her working that much in the store, but I could be wrong. I don't want to not give her credit where credit is due. Dave was not a grocer. He got jobs elsewhere. Milt worked in the store, and we all graduated. Some graduated pretty good marks, and some didn't do too well, but we all did make graduation. And Milt went off to I went off to college. Shirley went to college in Lincoln, both of us. Milt did too, but he didn't stay very long because he and Dorothy were getting serious, and they were talking about getting married. So Milt had to go to work, and he worked in the store, and he ran the store that my father had in Benson until they got married. And then he worked a little while after that, and then he found a more lucrative job. And Ed went off to college in Illinois, Champaign, Illinois, and graduated from there, then came back to Omaha and went to med school in Omaha. He married Phyllis Steinberg, who was a competitor of my father's on 16th and Burke. He had a grocery store right across the street. Now my family, I mean my husband, Quatek, Sidney Quatek, and I had 2 children. We have a boy and a girl, Ron and Terry Quatek. Then I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. I was the oldest. My sister Shirley Sorkin was next. Then my brother Milt, who married Dorothy Bloom. Then there was my brother Dave, who married Faina Manvitz, and my brother Ed, who married Phyllis Steinberg. And I was the only one who stayed in Omaha. The rest of them, Shirley moved to Denver, Milt moved to California, Los Angeles area, Dave moved to Kansas City, and my brother Ed moved to Kansas City. And we see them quite often, except that Milt and Dave have passed away. But we're still fairly close. Now I want to talk about my nieces and nephews. My sister Shirley had one child, Mark Sorkin, and my brother Milt had 3 children. He had Barbara, Jeff, and Michael. And Dave had 2 children, Corey and Rick Belzer. And Ed had 3 children, and it's, who was the oldest? Vicky was the oldest, then Michael, and Susie. And some of them live in Kansas City, some of them live in, I don't know, Denver, but they're kind of spread out. I remember some of the holidays that my mother used to have. Pesach. We would alternate going to Joe Bernstein's house for Passover one year, and then the next year it was our turn to have it at my mother's house. My mother asked everybody, all of her aunts and uncles. Well, they all had big families, so most of them didn't come. But the Bernstein kids were already adults, and so they would come, and I can remember as many as 30 people for Passover. And I don't know how my mother ever did it. You know, there was no aluminum foil and no freezers and no mix masters until later years. And they would stand there, she would stand there and beat those eggs for her cakes. And she made fish that we used to get, I think, on 24th and Ohio, I think. We would get live fish. And then we started going to Joe Tessa's in South Omaha. But big fish, they were hardly, almost as big as a bathtub, almost as long as a bathtub. They were immense. And she had to keep it in the bathtub until she got the utensils and everything ready. Then she'd give them a clop and cup, and we had fish, gefilte fish. And she made beautiful fish. She would take each piece of fish after it was all chopped and mixed up and everything. She would take the skin and wrap each fish around with a piece of the skin. And it reminded you of, now it does, it didn't then. It looked like a piece of bacon around a fillet is what it looked like. Each fish ball was exactly the same, and she always baked her fish. The rest of the holidays, my mother once did Shlug Hakaporas, or whatever you call it, where you twirl the chicken over your head until the chicken did a job on her kitchen floor. Then she says, no more. So she didn't make that anymore. That was 1 or 2 times that I saw her do that. That's it. And and Hanukkah was always a big treat, because there were so many of us. There were 5 kids. And we all got presents every night. Not a big present, but the first night was always money. And we all got our money. But each night, it was a pair of pajamas, a pair of slippers. It was something we needed, but it was still a present, and we loved it. The holidays really were, I don't remember any bad holidays. It was always a joyous time. And my father was what you'd call a jester. He joked. Everything was with humor with him. He never got mad. If he did, like I said before, he just didn't talk to you until he got over it. And that was it. I remember once when he wouldn't talk to me for 2 days went by. The 3rd day I said, Daddy, I got to talk to you. I would never do anything that would make you ashamed of me. And I said, and if you don't believe that, that's too bad, because that's the truth. And he looked at me and he got tears in his eyes and he took me by the cheeks and he gave me a kiss. And I'll never forget that, because from then on I think he trusted me with everything, because I wouldn't lie to him. That's one person I could never stretch a story or lie to him. And when I wanted a bicycle, he said, no, you can get hurt on a bicycle. You'll ride it in the street and a car will hit you. I said, no, I know where to ride, either against the curb or on the sidewalk. So one day he said, you want a bicycle? I said, yeah. He said, then go to Brandeis and tell them to deliver a bicycle that you pick it out and charge it to my account, to our account, whatever it was. And he did. Well, I wasn't going to touch that bike. It got delivered like late in the day, and here comes my father. It was summertime. Here comes my father home with the truck, and I'm standing there by the bicycle, and I'm admiring it, thinking it's the most beautiful bike in the whole world. He comes out of the truck and he looks at the bicycle, and I said, I'm not touching the bicycle until you try it first. Well, we lived on a hill. We lived at almost to the top of one end of the street, which is on the top of the hill, and you came down the hill and then up this hill to the other end of that street. So my father got on the bicycle. He hadn't been on a bicycle since he lived in Europe. And he got on that bicycle, and when he came back, I never saw a man so happy in his life. You'd think he had found $1 million. He was laughing and having such a good time. I said, how is it? He said, you're going to love it. And that was the end of the bicycle episode. The only thing he ever wanted me to really do was ice skate. He told me a story. He said, when he was a boy, he used to ice skate from his town to the next town where they knew other people his age. He ran around with several, I guess, boys and girls, but some of them lived in the next town. And he said that was their enjoyment, ice skating. So when I was in 7th grade, he said to me, maybe 6th grade, why don't you try to ice skate? I said, I can't ice skate. I've never been on a pair of ice skates. He says, why don't you try it? So he sent me up to the hardware store where they sold ice skates in Benson, and I bought a pair of Sonia Haney ice skates. And I thought, my gosh, I don't even know how to ice skate, and I'm taking home a pair of ice skates. So came Sunday, he says, come on, let's go to Benson Park. It's frozen over. Let's see how it is. So he took me down there, and he watched me ice skate. I took a few tumbles. He says, you'll learn. It's such a good sport. And that's my first ice skating experience. In fact, during a school vacation, must have been Christmas vacation, my father said, why don't you take a whole bunch of kids who you want from your class at school and go ice skating, and then you'll come home and Mama will fix you a lunch or a snack or something. I remember Mom made chili, and we had chili and crackers, and I don't remember what else, after we got through ice skating. And after that, several other children did the same thing. We all went ice skating, then we go to somebody's house and have a meal. It was fun. Gosh, there's so many good things I remember. When Terry was born, my father took one look at her and he said, that's not a baby girl, that's a princess. And he always referred to her as his princess. And she was a cute little thing and very, very bright. She got whatever she wanted from Grandpa and Grandma, from Bubby and Zadie. She was just the apple of their eye. She could do no wrong. And I had 3 brothers living at home. And what they didn't do to her, she was lucky to come out alive. They used to stand at one end of the living room and the other at the other end of the living room and throw her across the room. And this was, I think, a 22, 24-foot living room. I think it was that. I think so. It was a long living room. And she did grow up, and she was a bright girl in school, very bright. And she graduated from Colorado and went on to the banking business in Chicago, the Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago. And from there, a headhunter found her and brought her to San Francisco, and she became an officer at that bank. And then she went into the leverage leasing department and became the vice president of the leverage leasing department in San Francisco, which is their home office. And she's now retired. And Ron was our little Mazik. He was like his Uncle Milt. If there was trouble anywhere, Ron had a finger in it. One day, we were looking for Ron, because we had to go away or something, and I would yell, "Ron, Ron, where are you?" Nothing. I was ready to call the police, and I'm not kidding. I went into the bathroom to wash my face because we'd been outside and it was warm. And I thought, I've got to call the police. As I'm walking past the linen closet on the way to the bathroom, I hear a funny little noise. I opened up the linen closet and there's Ronnie sitting in the living room. He says, "Were you looking for me?" I could have killed that child. I mean, if he wasn't so damn cute and full of personality, I'd have killed him. Anyway, Ron grew up, not with my help, just by sheer luck. And he went off to college, which he was not a good student. And he didn't particularly like school, but he was done okay. Then he got married, and he has a little boy, Zachary, who was absolutely adorable. He had so much personality growing up, and you just couldn't help but love him. He just liked people. He was very outgoing. And now he's 15 years old and talking about going into high school and being able to drive. So we have some nice conversations. He comes every year to stay with us about a week. Sometimes it's been 5 days, but most of the time a week, ever since he's been little. And in fact, I had to meet him in Chicago because in those days he could only go from Detroit to Chicago and then transfer planes into Omaha. So I would go to Chicago and pick him up there, and Ron would bring him to Chicago. And then I would take him from Chicago to Omaha, and the same way to take him home. Took him to Chicago, Ron was there, Ron took him on home. And we talk sometimes twice a week, sometimes only once a week. But he's a good kid. Now I'm going to tell you about my marriage to Bill Cohen. That was a very funny thing. We were having lunch, not Bill and me, Benny Nachman, Elaine Cohen, Benny Nachman and Elaine, his wife, and I believe Sarah Masters was there too. We were at Panera's having lunch, and Elaine mentioned that she's going to have company for dinner, so she better get home. I said, "Oh, who are you having?" So she tells me, "Bill Cohen." I said, "Oh yeah, I know who it is." So I said, "What are you fixing?" And she said she's going to have, she said she was going to have short ribs for dinner. And I said, "Elaine, short ribs is a peasant food. You don't have that for company." Well, I didn't realize he wasn't really company to them. It was just a friend coming over for dinner. So anyway, I was razzing her about this peasant food. And she just laughed. She said, "Oh, they're good," and so forth. So we parted ways. I went home, they went home. After dinner, I get this phone call. And he doesn't say too much. He just says, "Hello. I just want to tell you that those short ribs were darn good, and there's nothing wrong with them. I enjoy them." So I said, "This is Bill Cohen." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you don't serve short ribs." how about a nice steak or something like that? No, he says, I like short ribs. Okay, so we were talking for a while, and he asked me out, and we went out, and before you know it, we got married. And I'm very happy, I think he is too. We're quite compatible. We're exact opposites, but we're compatible. And I want to leave a message to Terry and to Ron and to Zachary. I love you all so much. I don't think you'll ever know really how much, because I'm very bad at expressing my emotions. Love you.